So welcome to today's Brand Square. I'm Kathy Oneto, Vice President of Brand Strategy with Anthem. And I'm also the creator and editor of Sightings. And we're going to talk today about setting the stage for 2014. And really what this is about is looking back at what we've been seeing in 2013 from a Sightings perspective. So for those of you who aren't familiar with Sightings, Sightings is an Anthem quarterly publication that we say offers inspiring inspirations from around the globe. And what we look at is trends in marketing, innovation, branding, and design. And we also use Sightings as a tool that we use with our clients to partner with them in looking at sightings that are relevant to their brand, their category, or their product to guide strategic decisions as well. So used in two different ways. So with that as kind of preamble and as background, let's go ahead and get started and get into setting the stage for 2014. So for those of you who may have missed our 2013 forecast, I want to just set this, review this briefly to kind of set up what I'm going to share with you over the next 20 to 30 minutes. So when we ended 2012, what we were seeing ourselves was that we seemed like we were entering this time of polarity and dueling choices. We felt like we were really at this inflection point, and we were curious where the world was going to take us. So our prediction was that we were going to start moving towards a new equilibrium, a place of balance that would be richer, simpler, and smarter. So throughout the year, that's really what we found. And what I'm going to share with you are some sightings from each of the last 3 quarters of the year and demonstrate how each of these have hit on these different aspects of richer, simpler, and smarter. So I'll start with richer. That's what we were seeing, especially in the first quarter of the year. And this related to what we felt was popping, if you will, in today's culture. One of the core things that we were sensing was this desire from consumers and those all around us for depth and emotion. So I'll give you some examples of what I mean by that. So the first one is around viewing and media consumption and entertainment consumption. So what we called viewing spree, or what's commonly called as binge viewing. And binge viewing has been driven by consumers having more control over when they can consume media content, but also through networks who have kind of started this trend by starting to air these series marathons. And it really gives consumers a different experience. And for most of us marketers, it kind of makes us cringe. Right? Like, oh, they can both go through our commercials, they're not always viewing when we really expect them to be viewing, etc. It adds a lot of complication. But when we step back to think about this and think about what it really means for consumers and why they're actually engaging in this behavior, we took a more positive spin, which was perhaps it's actually giving them a richer storytelling experience, and that despite in the old age of media where you might have created suspense and longing for that next episode, that perhaps this actually results in deeper and stronger engagement from these consumers. So what might this mean for marketers? So for one thing, if if consumers are starting to get attracted, and I should say if folks aren't familiar with the visual that's on the left-hand side, that's an example from Netflix when they first launched at the beginning of the year, their House of Cards series, where they launched all of the chapters of the first year's season at one time so that consumers were in control of when they were going to watch this. We also see this happening in Australia, where the Australia Broadcasting Network is offering their content for free, where consumers can watch these things at any time. So if you're in that type of environment, the first thing a brand needs to do is make sure that your content is worth watching in the first place. So it's really raising the demand of marketing content and what's being asked of by consumers. But the other thing is, I think this kind of goes back to what we were observing or taking away from this sightings, which was it actually may offer you, inspire you to create a content strategy that can be more multifaceted, more integrated, to actually build a richer storyline over time. So it's not all doom and gloom. It can actually inspire us to perhaps create really a richer picture of the brand. So that's the first one, this idea of viewing spree and creating richer experiences for consumers. The second one was around shopping behavior and this idea of personalized shopping. And what this is really about is this idea of creating a richer shopping experience. And what these various vendors are doing or companies are doing in terms of personalized shopping are, for one, creating an allure around shopping by creating a sense of discovery through offering new curated items that they send directly to shoppers. But not only that, they are also personalizing it such that their shopping baskets get more attuned to the consumer over time. And then there's no risk. If you find something that is not for you, you just send it back and there's no cost. Now, one example of this model is a slightly different twist, but it's represented on the picture on the left-hand side, which is Wantful, which is this great product and company that offers these personalized gifting experiences. So again, in this case, not only is it creating a richer experience for the person who is gift giving, but it also is creating a richer experience for the person on the receiving end as well. So what does this mean for marketers? For one, I mean, I think it's just inspiring to kind of think about how do I actually enrich or create a more fulfilling overall product experience for my consumer. The second is these are really new distribution channels. So these are new ways for a company to get their products out into the market. So it might actually create a new distribution channel for your products. And the third could be, frankly, just these are companies that are really keeping on top of trends, really engaging consumers and providing things that are new. So from a trend watching perspective, these would be companies that I would keep on the radar. All right, so the final one in this area of richer and what we were seeing at the beginning of the year was this idea of sentimentality versus humor. So at the beginning of the year, especially here in the United States, there are a couple of key events where commercials and entertainment are broadcast and are viewed by a lot of people, such as the Super Bowl and the Oscars. And what we were seeing was that during these types of broadcasts, while humor is often the way that brands break through, we were actually seeing that sentimentality was winning. And so you had commercials like the one from Dodge Ram, which was called God Made a Farmer, that was really impactful and rose to the top of the list of all of those that were rating ads from the Super Bowl and from the Oscars. And I think what we felt was that this was suggesting that consumers were seeking inspiration that really moves us forward and speaks to a better tomorrow. And these were commercials that tended to be longer, sometimes 60 seconds in length, that really had this authenticity, were really emotive, and had these inspirational stories. So the lesson for marketers here is just simply, like, humor is, it could potentially get attention from consumers, but it also might not be that long lasting. It could very well be fleeting. And we found that it could be interesting to really investigate this sentimentality angle, because for one, it might suit your brand better, but secondly, it might actually have longer lasting impact with your consumers. Okay, so that was our first quarter. That's what we were seeing. As we entered the second quarter of 2013, what was kind of getting elevated at that time was the simpler kind of angle. So what we were seeing here was this interesting shift where we were starting to sense a collective change in mood. So one moving toward what we ended up deeming the slow movement 3.0. And this was about more of a backlash against the progress that society has made, as well as the busyness and fast-paced of our lives. And what we believed, what we were seeing, was this desire from people all around for a better rhythm and cadence to life. So a couple of sightings that brought this to bear. So the first one is mindfulness. This was something that was really getting attention. I continue to see mindfulness get a lot of traction currently. I think it's still really a somewhat nascent trend that's going to continue to grow. But what this was really about is a consumer's desire to really stay in the moment, to really take a pause, to be more mindful, and a desire to really seek some peace and quiet. So one example of this is Selfridges in London, which is a department store. And there are a number of different things that this department store took action on to try to provide their shoppers with this moment of mindfulness. So one was they actually have on their shopping floor these meditation stations where people can take a pause from their shopping, put on these earbuds, get into a different state of mind. The second, which you're seeing a picture on the left-hand side for this is their silence room. So this actually harkens back to when the department store was launched in 1909, and they just reopened this in the past year, where this is a space where people can go in here and completely have silence. And then the final thing that they did, which makes us marketers kind of cringe actually, but is an interesting take, is they launched this quiet shop. It's actually a shop where they sell products that are non-branded. So again, creating this kind of openness and silence for consumers. So what marketers can kind of take away from this one is it's really, there's an opportunity to create products that really are mood setting, that create this environment for consumers to get this respite and this pause. And that relates to this desire for consumers to really experience some calm, relaxing moments. And if you perhaps, typically it's kind of excitement and energy that gets rewarded from brands, but perhaps by taking this element of supporting consumers and providing this element of pause and relaxation, you might be able to connect as well, given this collective change in mood. All right, so let's move on to the next one. So intimacy is the next one in terms of what we were seeing in terms of collective mood and slow movement 3.0. So what we believed was that, you know, we were entering a time where instead of people wanting to get as many Facebook friends as they possibly could, that they were actually seeking an opportunity to get closer to people and to limit, to narrow their connections and to get closer from a real, tangible connection standpoint and get closer to those that are truly physically around them. And what we were seeing here as one example, like in Sydney, some of their regulations were changing such that you were starting to see more small bars popping up. So in Sydney, it was typical because of the regulations that you had these large bar environments. Where today, what we were seeing was that they were starting to launch a number of different small bars that allowed for not only a more intimate experience between the people who were coming to the bar together, but also the intimate experience between, say, that barkeeper and themselves as well as the types of craft beers and product offers that were being offered in these small intimate settings. Another one here, and you're seeing it on the left-hand side, is this app called Nextdoor. So very interesting that, you know, typically, right, how you got to see your neighbors or get to know your neighbors in the past was you walked down the street and you knocked on somebody's door. Well, what Nextdoor does is it allows you, gives you a technology-based way to get to know those around you and to be able to communicate with those around you who live in your community. And not only have consumers been engaging with this, but we've also been seen governments also leverage this. So Mayor Bloomberg in New York City actually leveraged this to connect city agencies with local communities. So again, trying to build that intimacy and that connectedness. So what does this mean for marketers? I mean, for one, it's really to recognize that consumers are seeking this idea of intimacy, and you might be able to nurture these real relationships or provide offers that allow that type of connection. But another thing to consider is, like, how can you actually invite consumers in so that they can get to know your brand on a more personal level? So given the way that brand relationships operate today, given that they tend to be more purpose-driven and that consumers really want to connect with brands that fit their lifestyle and who they are, this is a way to start build that connection. How can you break down the barriers and become more intimate yourself? The final one that we were seeing around this changing collective mood was around honoring craft and this idea of appreciation. So one thing that we've been starting to see is that consumers are starting to, in some instances, realize the lack of value, if you will, in some of the items that they were previously purchasing. And so it's almost a backlash to mass in a way, where we're seeing consumers seeking something, seeking products that might be more personalized or might have a sense of connection to them, and also appreciating things that actually do take time to develop and to produce, creating something of quality, and especially something that they can integrate into their lives. So we've seen this renewed interest in crafted goods, and items not just with quality and artistry that actually end up being out of reach, but actually we're seeing a lot of craft products being brought to bear that are actually really accessible and really affordable for consumers. So what does this mean for marketers? For one, I think there's an opportunity, if you have the opportunity, to really communicate about the quality of the raw materials and ingredients going into your products, or about the processes one is using to make your products. Or you might be able to be communicating the skill and expertise of the designers and craftspeople responsible for these. If that's still not possible, there is an opportunity potentially to create a special line. So Levi's has a made in crafted line. So it's a special line that kind of highlights craft, and they play that up in that particular offer. And then finally, one can also look at the idea of developing stories around the products and people and places. And so that's something for one to consider as well. All right, so as we enter the last quarter that I'm going to talk about, this was in the area of smarter and this idea of untapped potential. So what we were seeing in this last quarter was this movement towards the idea of extracting untapped potential. And one of the key tenets of this trend is really about reimagining competencies, products, experiences, and brands in new ways to extract this type of value. So it's being able to use things in new ways to create innovation and bring new ideas to bear. So in this instance, I want to first talk about Africa ascending. And in this instance, it could just very well be that the time is finally right for this continent to kind of demonstrate its strength in new ways. So Africa has always been a continent of rich natural resources, but it also now has a strong growing economy and an emerging middle class. And for that reason, we feel like it's starting to show its true potential. And it's really becoming this rising marketing powerhouse. So not only are you seeing major international companies enter that market, you have the likes of Unilever that's been there for some time, but they're furthering their efforts in that country, but you even have hotel chains such as Marriott and Starwood that are planning to launch a number of different hotels in that market. But you also are seeing a lot of local manufacturers and craftsmen starting to further build their product lines. So SAB Miller, which is a company that was founded in 1895 in South Africa, is expanding its reach within the continent, bringing, in this case, actually some craft beers to different local markets. And again, this is an aspirational product for the growing middle class in Africa. And then you also have Oliberte, that's an example of one of the shoes there. And on the bottom of the shoe, actually highlighting where they're being produced in Africa. But this is a company that was founded within the last year that is really championing producing and honoring not only the natural resources, but the individuals and talent that resides in Africa. So what does this mean for marketers? So if you are an international company and you've still kind of been looking primarily at BRIC countries, Africa should be on your radar. It certainly seems like an excellent opportunity to be considered in terms of growth and connecting with consumers. Now, if investing or selling in Africa directly is not possible, consider partnerships, either with nonprofits or with other companies are there. We've seen a number of partnerships that have been formed, with African companies. So certainly would encourage people to consider that route as well. Certainly don't see not selling just directly in Africa as a limiter in terms of being able to tap into this potential sightings. All right, so our next one, so I actually happen to write on women and speak on women quite a bit, but I think it's really interesting to not forget about men. So I think leaning in towards men is a really interesting sightings to highlight, and kind of this idea of the other half of the shopper market. So certainly men over the years have become a more active target market, and certainly we've been seeing some categories that have really been growing, especially personal care, around this growing focus on men as a consumer target. But what we've also just in the last year been seeing a lot more CPG brands jumping into this. So for example, Tide is actually acknowledging now, like, men actually do laundry, if you can believe that. Yes, especially these days when we're seeing more single family households, as well as the fact that people are getting married later in life. Yes, men are doing laundry. In addition, they're participating more in the household as well. So they actually launched a Tide Febreze Sport line that had the New Orleans quarterback on it, and then they've also been featuring men in their advertisements as well. And they've been getting a lot of appreciation and attention from father bloggers as well for their acknowledgement and support. Frito-Lay with their Ruffles brand is another example here, where they've really shifted in this past year to shifting their marketing mix on Ruffles to target men. So all across their marketing mix, they've made changes to kind of more squarely target the male consumer. And then finally, J.Crew, which is what you're seeing on the left-hand side, has also taken a renewed effort to how do we actually craft a shopping experience that is specifically for men, and that's a picture of their what they deemed the liquor store, which in New York City, which was a store that they opened specifically targeted towards men, and named simply because that was what the space that they took over had. That was the old name of it as well. So again, certainly an opportunity in a number of different brands. Engaging in terms of targeting men, but it's something that really needs to be done delicately. So there's different ways of doing this, either squarely targeting men and understanding and deciding that that's who you want to target with one's product, or trying to balance and go after both, either finding a gender neutral marketing approach or finding a way to go ahead and speak to both. But don't do it lightly. It really does take deep insight and thoughtfulness to target these men, and not do so in a way that's kind of stereotypical, which we've seen some executions of that, which I won't mention, but have kind of fallen on deaf ears. So it does take the investment that is necessary to be successful. So finally, the final one that I'll talk about here is this idea of unlocking hidden capacity in everyday resources, and really tapping into resources that are there and reimagining them in new ways to create real value generating assets. And it's really about extracting value from items that exist in plain sight that perhaps were previously overlooked. So as an example, take something like relay rides, which is now leveraging cars parked at the airport and renting them for you. So a new way of renting cars, so that asset isn't sitting there not being utilized. Think about Canadian startup Local Garden, which is using rooftops, right? Rooftops are all around us, and they're turning them into local gardens to produce local produce. Or even Rotterdam-based Everyday Floor, which actually has created technology that harnesses energy that gets created when people dance on a floor, or in convention centers where people are walking, and take that energy that is created and then utilize it in other forms of energy. So it's taking these things that they exist there, that energy existed. How do I actually harness it and utilize it? So hopefully that can inspire marketers to think about, within your current asset base or even your current supply chain, how might you find new ways to utilize these assets? It might inspire you from an innovation perspective to not see limitation, but potentially a lot of great opportunity, and how you might be able to rethink those assets that you have today just in new ways. So to wrap up, I know I went through that pretty quickly, but with that as grounding and as a perspective of the idea of being richer, simpler, and smarter in 2013, what's to come in 2014? So this might be a little premature. We're certainly still formulating our opinions, but to some degree, we kind of feel like the time has come to finally take advantage of what the Great Recession perhaps laid before us, which was an opportunity to reboot and set a new course. So as we move through this last quarter of the year, we believe we're starting to potentially see the stage really being set for this time of redefinition. So I'm not going to say more about that now, but we will be releasing our next sightings at the end of December and speaking about it in January. So we'll be happy to share more in that time. So if you've missed, I know I went through that quickly, if you happen to miss any of our sightings, you can certainly access them online, and the URL is up on the screen right now, as well as you're welcome to reach out to myself. You have my contact information up on the screen too. And I really thank you for your time today and being with me. If there are any questions, I'd be happy to try to answer them. Okay, well, I'm seeing a question here around do brands that have traditionally been more strongly rooted in the female gender still have an opportunity to market to men, and how? So I do think that brands that have been targeted to women can certainly reach men. So I think that Dove is a great example of this. I think that Tide, obviously, the one that I shared, is a great example of this. And I think Dove is such a great example because they were definitely squarely targeted towards women, but what they've done is done a beautiful job of really looking into insights and identifying a way to bridge that gap of what their brand stood for and reach over and target men. So the key thing here is not doing it lightly, as I mentioned earlier, really investing in those insights that are going to propel your brand forward and connect with that target in a real meaningful way. All right, the next question here was, do you foresee the craft trends sustaining, and would one need to build credibility in the space before we venture into launching a special or limited edition line? So for one, I do think that the craft trend is going to continue to, I think it's, it's certainly come and gone, and I think this is a renewed interest in this. I think that it is still very early on in this trend. I think the maker movement is just getting started, which is going to continue to fuel this trend. So, I think that, again, here, I don't think it limits a brand in terms of, do you need to build credibility? I think you need to do it very authentically and thoughtfully in terms of if you're going to go after the craft trend. One example that's kind of interesting that's come out in the last, I think, year and a half is Vlasic Pickles' Farmer's Garden line, where they did a wonderful job of really positioning that line and bringing forward something from that line that really has this craft feel, if you will. So I definitely think it's possible, and I don't think the trend is over by any means. It's certainly something, if I was looking at innovation, I'd be considering this area. All right, do we have any final questions? So the final one here, perhaps I'll cover, is just this idea around, given the idea of sentimentality versus humor, how do you think marketers should think about emotion today? Well, one thing here, I do think that marketers need to think about emotion on multiple levels. So certainly from a standpoint of, like, as I mentioned earlier, really think about, like, what is the right way for me to connect with my consumer? What's that true core motivation? And what's that goal compatibility that I'm going to have and share with my consumer target is certainly something that one should consider. But I also think about emotion in kind of three different ways in marketing today. I think we traditionally always think about it as how does my brand make consumers feel? But I kind of think about that as like, yes, you need to connect with the heart. Again, what's that goal compatibility I have with my consumer? But I also think you need to think about what's that gut feel that I also have? What's that gut emotional response and intuitive response that my brand is going to have? And does that brand feel right to me? And that has a lot of different impacts. But the other area of emotion, if you will, is this idea of emotion and intuitive responses are also habitual. So how do I actually build that loyalty and make sure that from an emotional aspect, when the shopper goes to the shelf, whether it be a brick and mortar shelf or an online shelf, are they reaching for me? And am I building that intuitive response and that emotional response for them to always come to my brand? So there's a number of different ways to think about emotion today, and I think it's really interesting. And certainly just think about that idea of sentimentality versus humor, going back to that, to see whether or not that's really the right way for your brand to connect with your consumer.
I don't know. I said the proposal yesterday.
All right, so I think I'm at my time limit. Thanks so much, everyone, for joining me today and for listening to our sightings presentation. I look forward to bringing forward to you our forecast at the end of the year and being able to share that out in January. Thank you again for your time. I really appreciate it, and I apologize again for the upfront.
For the brief, I wouldn't say so.
Okay, great.
I don't think so. Sorry.